You might not believe it if I said it, but I transmigrated. No system, no cheat abilities, and my identity is that of a pauper who can't even afford a drink. Everyone thinks the portal is a shortcut to getting rich, but only I know that it's the passage that will bring about the end of the world in 2 years. To stay alive, I decided to cling to someone powerful, and my teammate is a doofling girl who doesn't even reach my waist in height. But only I know that this little runt sleeping on the warehouse floor in the future will become the captain of the entire kingdom's night order. My name is Lhasa, and at this moment I'm leaning against the railing outside the Whitestone Tavern. With only a little over 20 copper coins left in my pocket, not even enough to buy a mug of ale. It's been 3 months, a full 3 months since I transmigrated to this world. No system, no cheat ability, not even a single gold coin. The only good news is that I know this world. In my previous life, it was an online game called Dungeon and Portals. The bad news is, I damn well never played it. Only watched a few short videos. And what's the worst news? According to the plot from the videos I scrolled past, in a little over 2 years this continent will be invaded by monsters from another world. More than half the land will fall, and fewer than 1/3 of the people will survive. In the game of my previous life, there was still a player community influencing the plot, but in this world, after observing for 3 months, I haven't found any trace of those otherworldly players. Lie flat. Sure, and in 2 years you'll either be killed by monsters or spend your days hiding everywhere, barely clinging to life. My gaze fell on the tallest building not far away, the Adventurers Association. That was my only way out. Deerwood Town had originally been just an inconspicuous little village between the Lua River and Mount Bofu, but ever since that white portal appeared, everything changed. 47 years ago, 26 enormous gates appeared across the continent overnight. Within their strangely shaped frames churned mists of different colors, and on the other side of each gate lay an otherworldly dungeon filled with both danger and opportunity. No one knows any more the name of the first person to enter a portal, but the first person to come out alive is known in every household. Count Sistan. Originally just a commoner, he relied on the power he gained inside the portals to step forward when the Northern War Kingdom had fallen into decline, turning the tide of battle in one stroke. On the day he received the kingdom's Golden Iris Medal, the king announced the establishment of the Adventurers Association. From then on, everyone went mad. What did injuries matter? What did death matter? Dreams of getting rich overnight and leaping across class boundaries drove countless people to rush toward the portals one after another. But I know the truth. Right now, these portals look completely harmless, but in the 50th year after their appearance, that is, a little over 2 years from now, the portal channels will reverse, and monsters will pour into this world through this shortcut. The whole world will become a battlefield. With a creak, the tavern door was pushed open, and a petite figure came bouncing out, her brown braids swishing back and forth behind her. Hey Lhasa, I've got it all settled. Maggie Travel Song, of the Duflin race's Lightfoot clan, only came up to my waist in height. And she always wore that excited expression on her face, as if there were nothing in the world that could trouble her. I instinctively dodged to the side, avoiding the punch she threw at my waist. Over these past 2 months, I've experienced firsthand just how ridiculously strong this little girl is. Which party did we join? I asked. Todd, the Archers group. Someone in their party needs to rest, and Todd also has a nephew who's a newcomer, so the timing is just right for us to join. Maggie scratched her back, and that clearly ill-fitting adventurer outfit of hers was all wrinkled. Tomorrow morning, at the association entrance. Don't be late. I nodded. We had prepared for this adventure for a full 2 months. We scouted for second-hand equipment at Stonefist Smithy, practiced basic swordsmanship at the training grounds of the retired veteran Kexis, read that best-selling book from the general store, Introductory Notes for Dungeons, and got our adventurer ID cards. After buying a full set, the little inheritance my original body's parents left behind after they died, along with the savings I had accumulated working as a porter in the dockside warehouse, was completely spent. The short sword on me is a second-hand item I picked up at the blacksmith shop, and the wooden small round shield on my back, shaped like a pot lid, was a resignation gift the warehouse manager kindly gave me out of sheer generosity. Maggie also had a shield strapped to her back, ugly in shape like a lump of iron, even bigger than she was. Supposedly she got it from her uncle, who worked in Iron Furnace City. I really don't know how much she suffered carrying that thing over mountains and ridges all the way from the Thunder Ridge Mountains to Kelvin County. The rules are still the same. They get first pick of whatever is in the treasure chest. And each of us gets one thing that's left over, Maggie said. Obviously they'd take the lion's share. After all, Maggie and I were newcomers tagging along with the strong, so being able to get a few scraps was already pretty good. It's just that the timing came too suddenly. We'd been preparing for 2 months, and now we're setting off early tomorrow morning. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't nervous. Let's make do and sleep in the warehouse for one night, get plenty of rest, and do a great job tomorrow. I waved my fist at the sky, trying to pump myself up. Maggie didn't need any pep talk at all. The excitement on her face was practically overflowing, and those little freckles seemed to dance along with her expression. Everyone, Miss Maggie's adventure story officially begins tomorrow, she shouted toward the street. Passers-by all turned to look, and she could still give a bow without changing expression. I quickly dragged her away. It was too embarrassing. Speaking of Maggie, she might be the only life-saving straw I've managed to grasp since transmigrating here. All that information I'd heard here and there in my previous life was most helpful to me in that it let me recognize her. When I had just transmigrated and was working as a porter in the dockside warehouse, she always looked familiar to me, but I simply couldn't remember where I'd seen her before. It wasn't until 1 midnight when I jolted awake that I suddenly realized, back when Dungeon and Portal had its major version update in my previous life, the game's official team did a viral marketing campaign and made a recruitment at CG. The protagonist in it was a dwarfling girl, wearing a heavy suit of plate armor and shouting lines about joining us and fighting evil together. The BGM was insanely catchy. It went viral across the entire internet back then, with all kinds of meme videos and fan-made reaction images everywhere. That character players called Little Commander later became the leader of the kingdom's Knight Order. And the Maggie before my eyes was still that working girl in the warehouse wearing dull gray linen clothes. But I already knew her future. With my survival instincts in overdrive, I immediately started cozying up to her and forcibly turned us from ordinary co-workers into best friends. It's really easy for like-minded people to become friends. I was determined to grow stronger through the portal to deal with the crisis. While Maggie was a born adventure fanatic, she came to Deerwood Town for the sake of entering the portal. She had only ended up working at the docks because she'd spent all her money on the way. As night fell, the Lua River lay calm and deep under the moonlight, and the dock's oil lamps reflected scattered glimmers on the water. In the warehouse, I lay tossing and turning on a bed made from 3 wooden crates, unable to sleep. While 2 were enough for Maggie over on the other side of the aisle. Lothar, Master John said that when you're in the dungeon, you must never forget your original intention. That is, the purpose you had when you first set out to adventure. Maggie tilted her head at me, still holding that best-selling book, Some Advice from Master John to New Adventurers. What are you adventuring for? I was silent for a moment. If I said it was to save the world, would you believe me? Wow. Do you want to become someone like Hero Arthur? Maggie's eyes widened. Hero Arthur, a legendary figure from more than 30 years ago, was said to have a sword that glowed blue and to roam about righting wrongs. But what he was most famous for wasn't those heroic deeds. Instead, he led a team of elite adventurers into the Black Portal and never came out again, becoming one of the earliest victims of the Black Portal. What about you? I asked her back. What did you run away from your hometown to go adventuring for? No sooner had I said it than Maggie sprang up from the wooden bed, looking like if you want to talk about this, then I'm definitely not sleepy anymore. This is a tradition of our Lightfoot clan. When we're young, we go out adventuring and traveling, making a name for ourselves on the continent, and when we're old, we return to the valley to tell the children our adventure stories. Whoever can tell stories the longest is the most impressive. Old Grandpa Bowiki next door to my house told stories for 5 whole nights. Her eyes were wide and her face full of pride. At that moment I thought that, in her heart, even Hero Arthur was probably not as impressive as Grandpa Bowiki, who could tell stories for 5 nights. Then I thought again. Back then, it was also by telling her adapted stories from my previous life that I got close to her. If I went to her hometown, I'd probably become the idol of countless Goblin children. When I left Thunder Ridge Mountain, I already decided that when I go back, I'll tell stories from the Summer Grass Festival all the way to the Winter Snow Peak Festival. Maggie brandished her little fists and declared solemnly, now everyone is living in peace. And even those pointy ears are shaking hands and making peace with us all fake and polite. The only places that can still be called adventurous are the worlds beyond the portals. That wasn't wrong. Over the past dozen years, the continent has entered an era of peace. Trade and cultural exchange among the 4 major races have become more and more frequent, and the upper echelons meet once a year in an atmosphere so friendly it's unbelievable. Recently, there are even rumors that Prince Granchid is going to get engaged to the youngest daughter of the Ohak chieftain. I've already planned it out. First we'll go through the White Portal in Deerwood Town, then the Yellow Portal in Moonlake City, and after that, Maggie, Time to sleep. We still have to go adventuring tomorrow. I turned over, leaving her only my back. True enough. Good night, Lhasa. Before long, her loud snoring came from the other side of the hallway. Being able to fall asleep the moment her head hits the pillow, no matter the environment. That is the true Dovlin nature hidden beneath Maggie's petite and adorable appearance. But I just couldn't fall asleep. In my previous life, I slaughtered enemies in games, but in reality, I'd never even killed a chicken. And this body's original owner was only a warehouse laborer who did manual work, likewise someone who had never seen blood. After 2 months of training, my swordsmanship teacher's evaluation of me was only 4 words, barely a beginner. Even the warehouse we're living in now was something we got by begging shamelessly through personal connections. If we don't make money from entering the portal tomorrow. No, I suddenly figured it out. Tomorrow there are only 2 possibilities. Either we return victorious and move into an inn, or we die in the portal and never have to worry about money again. Thinking of it that way, I actually felt calmer. Early the next morning, the morning mist in Deerwood Town had not yet fully dispersed. The surface of the Lua River was shrouded in haze, and the sunlight filtering through the clouds gilded the spire of the Adventurers Association with a golden edge. I stood at the entrance of the association with 2 dark circles under my eyes, resentfully looking at the energetic Maggie. The quality of her sleep last night was outrageously good. Maggie, you still have your Adventurer ID card, right? Of course. It's the most valuable thing I own. She pulled the thin metal card from her clothes, still carrying her body warmth. Entering a portal doesn't cost money, but your ID card must be verified. Whether it's registering the time you enter or buying and selling in the trading area on the 2nd floor, this thing is the Adventurer's all-in-one card. Getting a new card costs 1 silver coin, equivalent to 100 copper coins, several times all the money I currently own. I lowered my head and looked at my own ID card. Apart from the name La Cigarette, there were only 4 blank circular patterns on it. After passing through portals of different levels, the association will etch the corresponding emblems onto the card. Only those who hold a low-level emblem are allowed to enter the next-level portal. This rule is probably meant to stop some reckless fools from charging straight into high-level portals and getting themselves killed. Look, that's Todd's nephew. He's a newcomer, just like us. Maggie pointed with her finger. A boy who looked under 15 walked over, thin and wiry. His head lowered, not daring to make eye contact with anyone, the hand gripping his scabbard trembling slightly. His equipment was a little better than mine, the same short sword and round shield. But his round shield was covered with a layer of iron plating. Morning, Jamie, where's Uncle Todd? The boy didn't seem used to Maggie's enthusiasm and replied a little stiffly that he went to the eastern streets to find someone, and would be here soon. The eastern streets were the territory of casinos and brothels, the money pits of countless adventurers. This guy was even more nervous than I was. I glanced at the calm Maggie, and silently sighed to myself that even among newcomers, there were differences. A few minutes later, Todd appeared, followed by a burly man nearly 2 meters tall. Bald, thick beard, several hand axes hanging at his waist, a giant axe strapped to his back, and wolf totems tattooed on his bare arms. An Ohak tribesman, a barbarian from the northern ice plains. Because of the Northern War decades ago, inlanders were somewhat prejudiced against them and privately called them savages. This man's name was Nurkin. In the more than an hour since we met, he hadn't said a single word, as silent as a stone statue. Yo, you're here pretty early. Didn't sleep well last night? Todd looked at me. The rats were too noisy. I brushed him off casually. The 5 of us walked into the association hall, where quite a few adventurers were already gathered. At the registration desk sat a Dharan girl with long pale golden hair, pointed ears, and skin so fair it seemed to glow, a classic elf appearance. Maggie nudged my leg with her elbow. Look, pointy ears. Her tone was full of disdain. The grudge between Duflin and Dharan had a long history. Although the higher-ups of the 2 races had already made peace, the private friction and mutual slurs had never stopped. Todd walked back from the registration desk, number 7, pretty near the front. The adventurers in the waiting hall all kept their voices low, and the atmosphere was somewhat oppressive. Even Maggie had quieted down quite a bit. Bursts of noise came from the 2nd floor. That was the trading area, where the treasures obtained in the dungeon were bought and sold. I'd gone up there once before, but after just one look at the prices, I gave up. The most basic unit of trade there was the silver coin. Over at the Royal Capital headquarters, silver coins were useless. Buyers and sellers only recognized gold dragons and crystal skulls. While waiting, Todd started giving his nephew Jamie a crash course. You newcomers had better buy your equipment at Stonefist Smithy. Don't go to Flea Street. There are too many fakes there. Look at this leather armor of mine. He pointed to the white, translucent stone in the middle of his collarbone, about the size of a fingernail. White crystal equipment. The treasure chest from the Deer Forest Town portal only drop items of this grade. Although it's low-level equipment, it's much better than what a blacksmith can forge. I noticed some tiny cracks on the crystal. The lower the durability, the more cracks there are, when the durability is completely gone. The whole piece of equipment goes poof and disappears. Huh, wouldn't that mean running around naked in the dungeon? Maggie's train of thought was always this wild. Todd burst out laughing. That's right. So you definitely have to wear a few extra layers of underwear inside. The atmosphere immediately lightened a lot, and even Jamie, who had been tense the whole time, managed a reluctant smile. Although the durability of my leather armor had dropped a little, selling it would still be worth 6 silver coins. A complete one is worth at least 10 silver coins. So as long as nothing goes wrong on this trip, each of you will earn at least 10 silver coins. Working at the docks for months wouldn't compare to making one run in there, right? True. Risk and opportunity go hand in hand. The predecessor worked in the warehouse for years and only saved a few silver coins. But one trip through the portal, as long as you don't die, is enough to make a fortune. But don't expect to make big money on your first 2 runs. You'll need to use your share of the loot yourselves. Todd grinned at Maggie's bulky outfit, especially you. Little one, in that getup you wouldn't even be able to roll around in there and get back up easily. Maggie hopped a few times in place. I think it's pretty good, as long as I can keep up with the monsters. Jamie, if you had half her confidence, I'd be relieved. Jamie kept his head down and said nothing, the hand resting on his sword sheath trembling the whole time. Number 6, Grey Wolf Squad. A girl with glasses called out loudly, and several adventurers dusted themselves off and followed her into the room inside. We're next. Pack up your things and get ready. Todd clapped his hands. Nurkin, who had been sitting on the ground wiping his axe, sprang to his feet with a start. A few minutes later, the girl came out again. Number 7, Todd's Squad. It's our turn. Mister, isn't your team name a bit too plain? Maggie sounded a little disappointed. Trust me, a plain name is better. No matter how good a team name is, it's not as good as having real skill in your hands. Everyone, time to go make some money. We followed the staff member into the inner room, and that room was even bigger than the hall outside. Beneath the high vaulted ceiling, the white portal stood there quietly. The semicircular marble frame was covered with relief carvings shaped like strange creatures, and the dense white fog inside the portal churned and rolled endlessly. Staring at it, I seemed to hear the howls of monsters on the other side. In my mind, I silently reviewed everything about portals. They are divided into 5 types according to the color of the mist: white, yellow, red, purple, and black. The darker the color, the higher the difficulty. The one in Deerwood Town is one of the 10 white portals. From white to purple, people have successfully challenged them all, but as for the black portal, from the day it appeared until now, no one has survived. It stands quietly on the outskirts of the royal city, and everyone traveling there sees it. The priests of the church call it the Demon Gate, while the professors of the academy call it the Forbidden Gate. Stay close to me in a moment and go in together. Once inside, follow all my commands, and no one is allowed to act on their own. Todd's tone was more serious than ever before. The staff checked our identity cards one by one and recorded the information. Looking at the portal from the side, you could see the staff on the other side waiting to receive those who cleared it. They sat there quietly, like a silent promise. You will come back. You will come back. After the inspection was finished, the girl with glasses pointed toward the portal. Everyone, I wish you a smooth adventure. The white mist surged right before our eyes. Todd pulled Jamie and walked at the very front. Nurkin followed in silence, and the excitement on Maggie's face overshadowed her nervousness. I took a deep breath. 3 months. From the first day I transmigrated into this world, I had been afraid. Afraid of the catastrophe 2 years from now. Afraid of my own powerlessness. Afraid of everything unknown. But now, when I truly stood before this gate, all my fear had instead vanished, leaving only an indescribable calm. Taking this step meant a complete farewell to that ordinary life I once had. On the other side of the mist, here I come. The figures of the 5 people vanished from the room, as if they had never been there at all. The dense white mist gradually dispersed, and what appeared before Lhasa was a dim cavern. On the surrounding rock walls, some unknown moss-like organisms emitted a faint fluorescent green glow. There were some dark red traces on the ground underfoot, and the narrow passage was barely wide enough for 2 people to pass through. The stench of rotten flesh and rusty blood hit him head-on, and the damp chill from deep within the cave seeped slowly through Lothar's skin into his bones, making him shiver involuntarily. Looking back, the portal had already disappeared, replaced by a thick stone wall. Only by killing the monster lord of the current dungeon would a portal back to town appear. There was no turning back anymore. From the depths of the cave came the low growls of unknown monsters, wicked laughter, and the crunching sounds of flesh being chewed. Nurkin and Maggie walked at the very front. Lothar and I were in the middle, and Jamie watched the rear. Todd arranged everyone's positions. This is only a white portal. Relax, newbies. Keep your weapons ready. Seeing a little blood is better than anything. Maggie held that lump of iron shield in one hand and a small iron hammer in the other. Beside her, Nurkin's tall frame looked truly awkward in this cave. He hunched over and barely made his way through the passage. The cave grew narrower and narrower, and finally Nurkin spoke his first words of the day. No good. Too small. Nurkin can't get through. Lothar, you and Maggie take the front. I'll support you from the back with my bow and arrows. Todd looked at Lothar helplessly. This place really was too cramped for a big guy. Lothar forced himself to squeeze past, and Maggie winked at him. The foul stench in the cave grew stronger and stronger, and the sticky sensation underfoot was also deeply unpleasant. Lothar felt a burst of irritation. The passage ahead became a little wider, when Lothar suddenly saw several small figures pawing at something on the ground. Monsters. Lothar's heart jolted, and his original feeling of irritation was immediately dispelled somewhat. Dark green skin, grotesquely undersized bodies, and long pointed ears hanging down on both sides of their bald heads. That appearance, goblins. At that moment, those few ugly green-skinned creatures also realized that outsiders had invaded and turned to look toward Lothar's group. They widened their dark red eyes, evil smiles on their savage faces, and their oversized hands, disproportionate to their bodies, picked up the spiked wooden clubs from the ground. The goblins let out shrill screeches and charged at them. Use your shield to hold them off first, then seize the chance to slash. Todd instructed from the back as he took aim at the one running fastest in front. An arrow flew over Maggie's head and struck that goblin right in the chest. The goblin charging in front let out a miserable scream, twisted a few times, and then fell to the ground. Then turned into black powder and scattered within the cave. Monsters inside the dungeon leave no corpses. Aside from what is inside treasure chests, adventurers can take nothing away. The momentum of the remaining goblins' attack also faltered. For left. In an instant, images flashed through Lothar's mind of these green-skinned creatures committing all sorts of evil in the anime and novels of his previous life, stirring up the anger in his heart. He used his small round shield to knock aside a goblin's wooden club, ignored the recoil coming from the shield in his left hand, and swiftly thrust downward with the short sword in his right. The sharp blade cut through the monster's green skin and pierced into flesh and bone. The force of the goblin's club smashing against the shield gradually weakened, and the firm sensation of the short sword catching in flesh also disappeared. Looking at the black dust dissipating before him, Lothar only felt the surge of adrenaline in his body easing somewhat as well. He had practiced this whole sequence countless times on the training ground, and when he truly used it, it came naturally to him. The goblin before him was nowhere near as tough-skinned and thick-fleshed as those wooden dummies. Good thing it was goblins, Lothar thought. No matter which game from his previous life these green-skinned monsters were placed in, they would only be used for beginners to grind levels, the sort of notoriously weak creatures everyone knew. The moment he saw them, Lothar felt the stone in his heart finally drop, and much of his tension eased. Although Maggie wasn't much taller than the goblins, the few goblins could do nothing against her iron shield. She calmly swung her iron hammer and gave the goblin whose attack had been blocked a mind-blowing blow. Lothar even felt a little sorry for that goblin. He knew Maggie's strength well. Back at the docks, the workers would play arm wrestling matches in their spare time, and Maggie came in first every single time. Even when many people took turns, they still weren't her match. The amount of power contained in her small frame could only be described as wildly unscientific. The remaining two goblins instantly lost the courage to fight and scattered as they fled, slipping into the narrow passages inside the cave. You two are really not bad. Todd picked up an arrow from the ground, looked at the slightly deformed metal arrowhead, and frowned in distress. Should we chase after them and kill them all? Maggie cracked her knuckles and looked toward those passages. Of the 5, only she could squeeze into them. Save your strength. There's no point in killing these little runts. The most important thing is still the monster lord. Todd patted Jamie on the shoulder. Jamie, switch positions with Lothar. I'm worried these little monsters might sneak up on us from behind later. Lothar walked over to the aggrieved-looking Nurkin. This burly man was probably the one among the five who most wanted to slaughter monsters. But this terrain happened to limit what he could do. Lothar still remembered that when they first came in, the fighting spirit in Nurkin's eyes had been sharper than the axe in his hand. Perhaps because he had seen how easily Lothar and the others had fought just now, or perhaps because the goblin's appearance made them easy to look down on, Jamie had clearly relaxed quite a bit. He imitated Lothar's earlier stance and walked to Maggie's side. Although they had both lost their parents, Jamie was better off than he was. At least he had a good uncle. Lothar thought that with the way Todd was looking after him, perhaps in a few more months Jamie would become a seasoned adventurer. There were more and more remains of various animals on the cave floor. But perhaps because he had stayed in the cave for so long, Lothar was gradually getting used to the stench as well. Then the party encountered several more waves of green goblins. Jamie, walking in front, looked somewhat clumsy. The way he flailed his short sword in panic made even Lothar anxious watching him. But Maggie beside him was killing with growing excitement. There were probably already 5 or 6 goblins dead beneath her iron hammer. Unfortunately, these green-skinned monsters were just as cowardly as Lothar remembered from his previous life. Every time a few companions died, the rest would scatter and run. After the group walked for a while, the passage ahead grew wider and wider, and a cavern appeared before them. On the rock walls were torches burning with ghostly blue flames. Inside the cavern, more than a dozen goblins danced strangely around the iron pot set over the bonfire in the center. This group of goblins was clearly different from the earlier ones. They were larger, with many yellow-brown spots on their skin, and a few even had crude wooden baskets on their backs. See if we can launch a sneak attack and take out a few. Todd signaled for the others to lower themselves, his longbow already fully drawn. Lothar and Maggie hid behind a stalagmite pillar. Neither of them had ranged weapons. Compared with melee swords and blades, bows that require aiming and shooting need training build up over time even more, and more importantly. The longbows and shortbows at the blacksmith shop were both quite expensive, and arrows had to be bought separately. As for hand crossbows, their price was even more than Lothar could ever afford. The open terrain also gave Nurkin room to show what he could do. He took aim at the strongest-looking goblin and made a motion as if to throw his hand axe. Jamie carefully guarded Todd's side. Just now he had also killed 2 goblins, though somewhat clumsily, and the first goblin had been stabbed by him countless times. He stared at the goblins ahead, dancing in wild frenzy, but failed to notice that a stone pillar beside him was about to come into intimate contact with the metal round shield in his hand. At the moment when the goblin's shrill cries briefly subsided, that clang sounded especially harsh. The goblins turned to look, their scarlet eyes filled with bloodlust and cruelty. Todd's arrow and Nurkin's flying axe cut through the air almost at the same time. The hand axe split one goblin's head in 2, while the arrow pierced straight through another goblin's chest. The one struck by the axe let out a miserable scream and turned to dust, while the one hit by the arrow staggered but managed to steady itself. It let out an angry roar and pulled a sharp stone from the wooden basket on its back, hurling it hard in Todd's direction. Todd tried to dodge sideways, but was too late. The stone grazed his leather armor, adding another crack to the white crystal on it. "Uncle, I'm sorry." Jamie apologized in a panic. "These monsters are different from the ones just now. Everyone, close in a bit and hold the formation. Nurkin, let's deal with the ones throwing stones first." The dull pain coming from Todd's chest made his expression change. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When he opened them again, his pupils had turned into golden vertical slits. First-tier battle skill, Eagle Vision. Todd swiftly knocked an arrow and fired. This time the arrow went straight through a goblin's skull. Lothar gave Maggie a look, and the two of them, shields in hand, slammed a charging goblin to the ground together. Short sword and iron hammer struck at the same time, sending the goblin into reincarnation. Over there, Nurkin had already taken the giant axe off his back and cut a charging goblin in half at the waist. These goblins seemed unaffected by their companions' deaths, and continued charging forward without fear of death. Those few goblins throwing stones were also providing fire support for the companions in front. The stalagmite pillars of all sizes in the cave became cover for Lothar and the others. Only Nurkin paid no attention at all to the stones flying at him. He swung his giant axe, venting the frustration he had felt in the previous cave. While dodging the stones being hurled at him, Todd sniped at those goblins attacking from range. Jamie still seemed guilty about the accident just now, and guarded Todd's side in a flustered manner. However, hardly any goblins could actually reach them. Either they were cut down by Nurkin's axe, or they were held at the front by Lothar and Maggie. Judging from the feeling of his sword tip breaking through flesh, these goblins were much tougher than the ones that had fled in panic earlier. After joining forces with Maggie to kill several, Lothar felt soreness in both arms. And the face of the wooden shield in his left hand was no longer as smooth as it had been when they arrived, now covered with many dents. It probably couldn't withstand many more hits. Lothar, I'll hold them off, you attack. A thin layer of sweat had also appeared on Maggie's little face. The physical strain from continuous fighting and the intense mental concentration made the exhaustion far worse than carrying things around in the warehouse. Fortunately, after a round of fierce fighting, there were only 3 or 4 goblins left in the cave. Seizing the right moment, Lothar kicked over the last goblin slinger. On the other side, Maggie and Nurkin had also finished the fight. The 4 of them, except for Nurkin, all sat on the ground to recover their strength. Todd, who had used a combat skill, looked a little pale. He took a small glass bottle from his belt, blue liquid sloshing inside. After tilting his head back and drinking it, his complexion improved quite a bit. A mental power potion, good stuff produced by the dungeon. Mine is a quarter portion, you can buy it in the trading area. Todd explained to the 3 newcomers. Let's take a break and eat something to restore some energy. Lothar also took out a water skin and some sliced rye bread from his backpack. Honestly, this environment really did nothing to stimulate anyone's appetite. Not far away, the iron pot the goblins had was giving off waves of foul stench from the unknown chunks of meat inside. Fortunately, Lothar's previous experiences had made his nose less sensitive to these fishy, foul smells. He could only restrain his curiosity about that iron pot. Over there, Jamie couldn't resist sneaking a few looks inside, then started dry heaving beside it. In this regard, both Nurkin and Maggie were quite calm. One held a piece of jerky, chewing as he looked around everywhere, while the other quickly finished her own portion, then looked at the bread in Lothar's hand with lingering desire. Uncle Todd, was that your combat skill just now? As Maggie spoke, the breadcrumbs on her lips bobbed up and down with them. Although Lothar was curious too, he found it hard to ask. After all, something like that was very likely an adventurer's trump card and private matter. Todd, however, did not mind at all, and even sounded a little proud. That's right, this is the foundation I have as a veteran adventurer. That combat skill is called Eagle's Vision, and it lets me aim more accurately for a short time. After saying that, he added with a mysterious look, but this still isn't my trump card. When we meet the Monster Lord later, I'll show you another trick. For us adventurers to survive in the dungeon, besides relying on better equipment, we also need our own combat skills. Those Monster Lords are far more formidable than these greenskin trash just now. Uncle Todd, aren't there also class badges? I saw in the association's books that adventurers who have a class are the real elite. Todd looked at Maggie with a helpless expression. You think class badges are that easy to get? At the very least, they're only likely to be obtained from dungeon treasure chests in yellow portals. Combat skills are different. If we're lucky today, we might even open a skill crystal later. But whether it's a class badge or a skill crystal, whether you can comprehend it all depends on fate. Some people also say it depends on individual aptitude. Right now, I'm just hoping to save up some money to buy a suitable badge in Moonlake City. Oh, and most importantly, you absolutely must choose your companions well. Finding teammates with a good reputation is more important than anything else. Otherwise, when it comes time to open the treasure chest, it'll turn into a bloodbath. Seeing the 3 newcomers listening so attentively, Todd suddenly recalled the scenes of adventuring with his older brother when he was young, and could not help sighing. The road of an adventurer is long, and I've only taken a few steps before I started going in circles. He looked at Lothar and Maggie. I'm afraid not many newcomers can match your performance just now. If you're careful, you'll definitely be able to go farther than I have. Lothar recalled how many people described Todd, one of the genuinely good ones among adventurers. Judging by today's experience, it was absolutely true. Luckily, thanks to Maggie's social butterfly nature, they had managed to hitch a ride on Todd's wagon. He had heard that some veteran teams in Deerwood Town were notorious for using newcomers as cannon fodder. For example, the infamous Black Fong Squad. Compared to them, Todd was practically a newcomer's best friend. After resting for a moment, Todd sat up from the ground. Everyone, I have a feeling. The Lord is just ahead. The dungeon corresponding to the White Gate shouldn't be too large. What's next is the real brutal battle. Lothar looked over and saw that beyond the limestone cave was a much wider tunnel, slanting downward all the way into the depths of the cavern. The dungeon lord and the treasure chest are up ahead. At the deepest part of the cavern was a limestone cave, even wider than the Adventurers Association Hall. Beneath the stalactite dome, 12 strong goblins surrounded a monster This was their king. It was hard to imagine a goblin could grow so huge. It stood close to 3 meters tall, hunched over, with protruding vertebrae forming twisted, sharp yellow bone spurs, and dark green skin covered in black patterns. Its head was more than 3 times larger than that of an ordinary goblin. Its long pointed ears hung full of bone ornaments, and its dark red eyes shone with an eerie light. In one hand it dragged a giant bone club, its end smeared with dark red bloodstains. In the other it gripped and gnawed on an unidentifiable corpse vaguely resembling a human, its sharp fangs covered with bits of flesh and blood. Can this thing really still be considered a goblin? Lothar felt a voice in his heart shouting, "Run, don't throw your life away. If you go back to being a porter, you can still live another couple of years." Maggie's expression didn't look too good either. The little iron hammer in her hand was probably no better than a toothpick to this monster lord. Jamie was in an even worse state. The courage he had gained from killing a few goblins vanished completely at this moment. His legs were trembling, and a thought rose in his mind. Run back to the previous limestone cave. It was disgusting there, but at least he wouldn't die. There was no turning back now, Lothar warned himself silently. From the moment he stepped into the portal, aside from killing this monster lord, there was no other choice. Even if they ran back to the previous cavern, they would only end up starving after their food ran out or dying under a goblin siege. "Uncle Todd, how do we deal with it?" Lothar steadied himself and tried hard to calm down. Todd gave him an approving look and said, "That big monster is for me and Nurkin. You 3 deal with those 12 little monsters. Remember, whether you kill them or lure them away, in any case you must not let them interfere with the 2 of us. Jamie, go with the 2 of them. Those little bastards are no match for you." Pale-faced Jamie nodded with difficulty. "Maggie, cover me later. When we get back, I'll treat you to a big meal at the Whitestone Tavern." Lothar threw a few stones at the goblins in front, and they immediately bared their teeth and ran over clutching wooden clubs. "I'm ordering the most expensive number 9 set meal. Lothar, don't forget I can eat several portions." Maggie struck the shield in her hand with her little iron hammer, drawing the goblin's attention. Jamie used the round shield in his hand to slam against a stalactite pillar. The banging echoed through the huge limestone cave. That mutated goblin lord came charging over as well, dragging its giant bone club. Before the 3 of them even had time to panic, an arrow shot out from the side and struck the goblin lord squarely in the arm. The monster let out an angry roar and looked toward Todd and Nurkin, who had circled around from the side. Of the arrow Todd fired, only the metal arrowhead at the tip penetrated the monster's flesh, and the lord's physical toughness made Todd frown. Nurkin let out a roar at the mutated goblin and charged forward with both hands gripping his axe. The goblin lord was quite a bit larger than Nurkin, but Nurkin still slammed into it hard enough to make it stagger. Its crimson pupils were filled with rage. The bone club in its hand smashed viciously down at Nurkin. Nurkin did not dare take it head-on and dodged aside. Just like that, the 2 giants began fighting at close quarters inside the lava cave. Meanwhile, under the cover of Maggie's shield, Lasse used his short sword to stab 2 approaching goblins to death, while his own wooden shield was completely ruined by a blow from a goblin's club. He kicked over a goblin that Maggie had rammed and left unsteady on its feet, then ended its life with a single sword strike. The crude swordsmanship he had learned on the training grounds of Kexis, through today's battle, had become more practiced, blending into his body and turning into a kind of muscle memory. None of this came without a price. With so many goblins charging at them together, it was hard for the 3 of them to come away unscathed. Both Lasse and Maggie were struck several times by the goblins. Lasse's clothes were even torn and ripped open by the wooden spikes on a goblin's club, leaving a large patch of skin on his back exposed. Lasse could feel that he had been injured in several places by the goblin's clubs. Perhaps it was the massive surge of adrenaline that made him temporarily ignore those dull aches. What he also ignored was the heaviness and soreness in both arms as he mechanically thrust his sword again and again. A 4th goblin fell, but there were still 5 surrounding him and Maggie. Lasse had originally thought Jamie would definitely hold them back, but unexpectedly, after killing 1 goblin, Jamie lured 2 others to a corner of the lava cave, and, using a stalagmite pillar for cover, fought a guerrilla battle with the 2 goblins. Maggie gritted her teeth tightly, and Lasse saw that the hands with which she held her shield had already begun to tremble slightly. She was drawing most of the goblins' attacks. Lasse took that small iron hammer from her, holding a sword in one hand and the hammer in the other, and with his left hand he slammed the iron hammer hard into a goblin's forehead. But the goblin merely fell to the ground, shook its head a few times, and looked somewhat dizzy. Maggie slammed it down, pinning its body with the lower edge of her iron shield. The goblin struggled desperately on the ground. Beside it, Lhasa dodged the blows of 2 clubs, rushed up, and gave it 2 more thrusts. For remained. Lhasa calculated in his heart. At this moment, a beast-like roar rang out. It was Nurkin's voice. His left hand was covered in blood, and several arrows were stuck in the goblin lord's body, yet they did not affect its movements in the slightest. It let out bursts of savage laughter and continued swinging its huge club at Nurkin. But a red glow burst from Nurkin's body, and his already powerful frame seemed to grow even larger, radiating an imposing aura. First-tier combat skill, Berserk. Nurkin gripped his great axe with both hands and hacked viciously at the goblin lord. The mutated goblin instinctively raised its bone club in an attempt to block, but soon let out a miserable howl. Nurkin's great axe severed the wrist gripping the bone club, and the axe's momentum did not lessen, carving a diagonal wound across the goblin lord's exposed chest. No blood flowed from the ferocious wound. Instead, bursts of black mist poured out. From the rear, seeing the goblin lord stagger after being wounded, Todd knew this was the moment to unleash firepower. He immediately focused and activated Eagle Vision, drawing his longbow to the full. The feathered arrow crackled with flashing red lightning, accompanied by a hissing explosive sound. The arrow flew out, and the instant it struck the wound on the goblin lord's chest, a dazzling red light exploded, and the current tore through the wound in crackling bursts. The air filled with the smell of overcooked, charred meat, and the goblin lord let out an even more agonized scream than before. Tier 1 battle technique, Explosive Arrow. This was Todd's true trump card. That dazzling red light instantly drew everyone's attention on the battlefield, including the few surviving goblins. Lothar snapped back to his senses and cut down a goblin that was still standing there dumbly watching the spectacle. Lothar, battle techniques are amazing. Maggie widened her eyes and murmured, "We'll all have them in the future." Lothar offered a word of comfort. This is only a Tier 1 battle technique. According to the association's popular guide, battle techniques are like portals and also have 5 different ranks. It's hard to imagine how powerful the final ultimate battle technique must be. There were only 3 goblins left around Lothar and Maggie. On the other side, Jamie had also slowly hacked one to death, leaving only one circling around with him. The situation seemed excellent. However, the goblin lord had not died. Although its chest was covered in scorch marks, large amounts of black mist poured from the head-sized wound. Todd met its crimson eyes filled with hatred and suddenly had a bad feeling. He saw the goblin lord let out a shrill scream and wildly smash the sharp stalagmites in the cave with both arms, as if it could no longer feel the pain in its mangled arm. The enraged Nurkin tried to stop it, but when his giant axe came down, it got stuck on the bone spikes on the monster's back. Seeing what the goblin lord was doing, Todd shouted, "Everyone, take cover." The frenzied goblin lord hurled countless fragments of stalactite. It no longer cared whether it might accidentally injure the few remaining subordinates it had left. It only wanted that human hiding in the rear and shooting sneak arrows to die screaming. Todd was the first to suffer. The most rocks were flying toward him. He reacted quickly and dodged the vast majority, but some still struck his body. A sound of crystal shattering rang out, and his leather armor dispersed into countless white points of light and vanished. Worse still, the mutated goblin's movements were too violent, and a stalactite on the cavern's ceiling broke off and fell, piercing his right leg. Next came Jamie and the goblin chasing him. The goblin was struck by countless rocks and instantly turned into black powder and disappeared. Jamie had originally been shielded by a stone pillar, but while running, his exposed left shoulder was struck by the flying rocks, and a sharp stone stabbed into his shoulder blade. Lothar and Maggie happened to be hiding behind a shield, and with 3 goblins acting as meat shields, they ended up with the lightest injuries instead. Maggie was completely unharmed, while Lothar suffered only some superficial wounds. The only enemy left on the field was the frenzied goblin lord, but the condition of the team members was also clearly poor. By some time, Nurkin gave up on the giant axe stuck in the goblin lord's back, and instead pulled the hand axe from his waist, wielding it with both hands and launching a frenzied attack on the enemy before him. The duration of the berserk state on his body was rapidly running out. Nearby, Todd propped himself up with one hand, enduring the intense pain in his right leg as he gritted his teeth and drew his longbow. "Maggie, we have to go in." Lothar rolled his sore wrist. In his previous life, no matter which game it was, abilities like Berserk were always followed by a period of weakness afterward. If Nurkin lost his ability to fight, Probably no one would be able to stop the frenzied lord. I'll ram its legs. Maggie shouted and charged forward with her shield raised. Lothar, catch this. In the corner, Jamie was also in bad shape. Half his body was covered in blood, and one arm hung limp. His face was also cut in many places by flying stones as he threw the small metal round shield to Lothar. Lothar nodded at him. No matter how useless he'd been earlier, at least right now he was a pretty good teammate. Lothar picked up the shield and ran toward the other end of the battlefield. The Goblin Lord was covered in wounds, but Nurkin wasn't doing well either. The duration of the battle skill Berserk was about to end, yet the struggle between the two sides continued. Nurkin dodged the monster's tusked bite and viciously hacked at its neck with his hand axe. But the hand axe got stuck in the goblin's flesh again. In pain, the Lord raised its long, deformed right leg, trying to kick Nurkin away. At that moment, the arrow Todd fired with the last of his strength hit the monster's supporting lower leg, but without the boost of a battle skill, the arrow could hardly deal enough damage. Maggie, hit the leg that got shot and knock it down. Lothar shouted. Maggie suddenly accelerated, hurling herself and her shield into the monster's injured left leg. Nurkin also seized the moment to pin the monster down with his body. With a loud boom, the Goblin Lord fell to the ground. Nurkin was on top of it, restraining the monster's arms. And the Berserk stayed on him had only 2 seconds left. Lothar came running, stepped on the monster's head, and leaped high into the air. In the Goblin Lord's red pupil, the tip of the short sword grew larger and larger. Ignoring the howls of the monster below, Lothar gripped the short sword with both hands and twisted it hard inside its eye socket. Black mist spread out from the eye socket along the blade. A wave of weakness hit him, and Nurkin could no longer keep the goblin beneath him pinned down. The monster lord shoved Nurkin and Lothar away and struggled to its feet. Black mist pouring from its countless wounds and nearly enveloping it, while that short sword was still lodged in its eye socket. Its movements grew smaller and smaller, until with a final wail, its entire body turned into black mist. The black mist gradually dispersed, and a huge metal treasure chest appeared in the center of the cavern. We won. Maggie jumped up from the ground. When the monster had just fallen, it had knocked her aside as well, but her constitution was so good it seemed as if she hadn't been hurt at all. Nearby, Todd and Jamie were supporting each other, leaning against a stone pillar the Goblin Lord hadn't wrecked yet. Jamie's pale face from blood loss was full of excitement, and Todd was also smiling as he stroked his little mustache. Nurkin, who had entered a state of weakness, looked as though he had shrunk a whole size. As he looked at Lothar and Maggie, "You too, very good." Nurkin happy. A faint smile actually appeared on the burly man's face. Nurkin rarely praised people. Todd took out 2 small glass bottles from his waist again, containing red liquid, quarter-life potions. This time it really was a heavy loss. He drank one first, then handed the remaining bottle to Jamie. After hesitating for a moment, the latter tilted his head back and drank it too, and the color in both their faces visibly improved quite a bit. If only Ivan were here, Todd muttered in a low voice. All 5 of them collapsed onto the ground, while eerie glimmers reflected off the metal surface of the huge treasure chest in the middle. "Little one, aren't you going to open the treasure chest?" Todd asked, squinting. "Uncle Todd, by the rules, you should pick first." Although Maggie wished she could run over and open it immediately, she restrained the restlessness in her heart. Lothar had the same thought. Along the way, Todd and Nurkin had been the true mainstays of the team, not to mention that they had already discussed the distribution plan before joining forces. If Todd and the others had ill intentions and meant to use them as cannon fodder in the dungeon, then turning on them now would still have been possible. Thinking it over carefully, although Todd might not be completely open-hearted with him and Maggie, he could at least be said to have been very friendly. If possible, next time he'd like to ride Todd's squad's coattails again, preferably with a revised distribution plan. Todd and Nurkin exchanged a glance, relaxed smiles appearing on their faces. "Let's rest for a bit, then let Nurkin open it later. I'll save the 2 most suitable items for you." Come to think of it, this treasure chest is ridiculously huge this time. Who knows if there are any good things inside? Lothar and Maggie had only seen schematic drawings of portal treasure chests in books before. This was their first time seeing a real one. Do treasure chests look different too? Jamie asked in confusion. Usually, the treasure chests from white portals look like they're made of wood, and they're only half this size. Todd nodded. It said that only yellow portals produce metal treasure chests, but they probably aren't this big either. Could it be that they gave us the wrong treasure chest? Maggie became excited at once. Haha, then we've struck it rich. The things inside a yellow portal treasure chest are worth at least dozens of silver coins. hearing the loud laughter coming from behind. Lothar smiled and shook his head. He picked up his second-hand shortsword. There were many more chips on the blade now. Just now he had wanted to return the shield to Jamie, but the other party said they could talk about it after going back. Although his whole body still ached, the thought that after they finished dividing the loot, he could go back to the tavern for a good drink and then sleep soundly until dawn made Lothar unable to hide his smile. The treasure chest in the center of the cavern lay quietly on the ground, waiting for the person who would open it. After the party sat on the ground and rested for a while, Nurkin was the first to stand up. Though he was still in a weakened state after going berserk, taking a few simple steps was no problem. His face showed the relaxation that came after a fierce battle. He was even imagining going back to the casino for a few rounds and winning back what he had lost that morning. The other four all watched him with expectant expressions. Although all five of them were injured to varying degrees, the moment of receiving their reward felt especially sweet. There was no lock on the huge treasure chest, and Nurkin opened it easily. He seemed to hesitate for a moment, muttered a few words under his breath, then bent over and rummaged through the chest again. Newcomers like Lothar didn't notice anything unusual. This matched their imagination of what opening a treasure chest should look like. Todd, on the other hand, said in puzzlement, "How strange. Normally, after being opened, the treasure chest disappears and the items inside appear on the ground. Why is this treasure chest different? And before, after opening a treasure chest, the portal back to town would appear immediately. This time the portal still hasn't appeared either. It's really very strange." Hearing Todd muttering to himself, Lothar's heart skipped a beat, and he could no longer remain calm. In his previous life, as an online streamer in the single-player gaming sphere, he had savored every Souls-like game in detail, and could recite their malicious design tricks from memory. This strange treasure chest suddenly reminded him of a certain notorious monster. "No, this is a trap. Nurkin, get away," Lothar shouted, startling the other three. Before his words had even finished, Nurkin over there still hadn't reacted, with half his body still inside the chest searching around. Suddenly, there was a crack, and the treasure chest snapped shut. Countless sharp fangs shot out from the inner walls, and the tremendous biting force made those densely packed teeth instantly pierce through the flesh of Nurkin's upper body. Even bone. Nurkin let out a scream and struggled weakly a few times. Then, accompanied by the sound of flesh tearing, his lower half fell to the ground. Warm blood sprayed out, splattering onto the ground, the stalagmites, and the treasure chest. Some droplets even drifted in the cold breeze within the cavern onto the four survivors. The expectant expressions on Todd and the others' faces froze in place. The accident had come far too suddenly. The ground of the cave trembled, the dirt cracked and churned, and a monster resembling a giant lizard burrowed out. It was nearly 4 meters long, its entire body covered in layers of earthy yellow scales with a rocky texture, and its limbs were knotted with muscle, ending in sharp hooked claws. Its slender tail, covered in barbs, swayed back and forth, but where a lizard's head should have been was that enormous treasure chest. A ring of blue patterns at the point where the neck joined with the chest glowed faintly, looking extremely bizarre. That treasure chest had opened and closed in a chewing motion, blood dripping from the chest onto the ground. Then a slender blue-purple tongue extended from the chest, curling around the half of Nurkin's body that remained. It was like a black widow that had spun its web and waited patiently for a long time. Now the prey had plunged headfirst into the trap, and it began to savor the thrill of slaughtering its prey. Lothar suddenly felt angry. Nurkin's smiling face as he praised him seemed still vivid before his eyes, though they had known each other for less than a day. After several battles fought side by side in the dungeon, this burly Ohak tribesman had already become a reliable teammate in Lothar's mind. Yet he had died so casually at dawn, after the battle was already over. With trembling hands, Todd took out his longbow. He reached for his quiver, only to find that there were just 3 arrows left inside. He had used too many arrows on the Goblin Lord just now, and those arrows were probably too worn to be used again. With his leg injured, he had planned to restock on a new batch of arrows after returning to town, but he had never expected another brutal battle to be waiting for them. And on top of that, the Ohak warrior he could rely on most in the party had already lost his life before the fight even began. He took the last bottle of mana potion from his waist. The icy potion was as bitter as his heart. This was the moment when the party's combat strength was at its lowest that day. Having just defeated the Goblin Lord, the remaining 4 were utterly exhausted, both physically and mentally. Lothar still did not want to give up. He knew that right now, The only one in the party who could inflict the greatest damage on this monster was Todd's combat skill. And all he could do was buy Todd the best possible opportunity. Uncle Todd, the three of us will draw its attention. Lothar looked at Maggie and Jamie. Let's show this ugly thing what we're made of. Maggie pulled out her little iron hammer. Jamie said nothing. He simply stood up calmly, tightening his grip with his one usable hand on the short sword in his hand. The treasure chest-headed monster was still chewing on Nurkin's lower half. The burly Ohak tribesman's feet intermittently visible inside. It ignored the remaining four, seemingly thinking that these wounded soldiers could pose no threat to it. Lothar and the other two seized the chance to charge forward together. The short sword stabbed fiercely toward the monster's abdomen, but the rebounding force made Lothar's palm go numb. A normal creature's soft abdomen was often the weak point of its body, but unexpectedly, even this area of the monster was covered in hard scales. Lothar's attack could not penetrate its defense at all. On the other side, Maggie and Jamie, who attacked the monster's legs and back, were similarly repelled. Todd, who had originally been preparing to take aim and shoot, also lowered his bow, looking troubled. Even if he overextended himself now, at most he could fire 2 explosive arrows, and even with combat skills, most of the damage would be absorbed by the monster's hard rock scales, unable to truly injure it. And if an attack missed, what awaited them would be being swallowed one by that treasure chest's gaping maw. The treasure chest-headed monster had not suffered any substantial damage. Its feeding interrupted, it impatiently lashed its long, spiked tail, sweeping it toward the three of them. Lothar and Maggie barely dodged it, but Jamie, whose movement was restricted, was not so lucky. Struck by the tail, he fell to the ground with a grunt of pain, and his short sword flew from his hand. Before Jamie could get back up from the ground, he felt something enormous approaching him. Looking up, he saw the huge treasure chest right before his eyes. Inside the slightly open lid, its fangs were still hanging with the flesh of his former companion. The monster's bluish-purple tongue extended out, and the intense stench of blood rushed at him. Jamie could even see the tiny bristles covering that disgusting tongue. Jamie revealed a bleak smile, casting even fear aside, and pulled out the last weapon on him, a dagger once used by his father, preparing to meet his fate. Lothar knew that the team could no longer afford to lose any member, even Jamie, who had previously been the least reliable. From the farthest position away, he struck his shield hard with his sword hilt, hoping to attract the monster's attention. In the empty cavern, the sound of metal clashing was especially piercing. Closer by, Maggie rushed forward and smashed the monster's tail hard with her hammer, but was quickly swept aside. Hearing the sound from Lothar's side, the monster actually turned its head to look, sparing Jamie who was right before it. Twisting its tail, it crawled over. In a posture very similar to the desert lizards Lothar had seen in Animal World in his previous life, except that its huge head rested against its back in a bizarre manner, and the ring of unknown runes around its neck was flashing. Lothar was stunned at first, then a guess formed in his mind. To verify his suspicion, he threw the battered short sword in his hand toward the nearby rock wall, and the metal struck the wall with a crisp clang. The treasure chest monster, which had originally been only 2 or 3 meters from Lothar, immediately adjusted its direction and pounced toward that rock wall, its sharp foreclaws scraping across the wall and leaving several scratches. So that was it. This monster had no vision and relied entirely on sound to determine its prey's location. Seeing what happened here, the other 3 instantly realized this as well, and no longer spoke to one another, their bodies remaining completely still. Having lost track of its prey, the lizard monster began crawling back and forth through the cavern again. Whenever it was about to approach one member of the team, it would be lured away by a stone thrown by another member. This might barely let them rest a little longer, but if they could not break through its defense, in the end it would only mean a slow death. Lothar calmly observed every move of the treasure chest-headed monster, wanting to find some clue from it. Excluding the areas covered in hard scales, and that treasure chest head that looked utterly indestructible, the only thing left was the place where the neck connected to the treasure chest, namely that small ring with glowing runes. But when the lizard monster crawled, that ring of runes was more than 2 meters above the ground. And to attack there, unless the monster was knocked to the ground, the short sword and small hammer simply could not reach it. They could only rely on Todd's bow and arrows, or climb onto its back. The crazy idea burst into Lass's mind and instantly took over all his thoughts. Yes, as long as he could climb up, with the height of its spine, he could easily attack that very conspicuous weak point. The only problem was that this was pretty much like those death-defying extreme sports from his previous life, with a very low success rate and a very high mortality rate. What if the monster's back was too slippery to stand on? What if he missed a step? What if he was thrown off while it was crawling? What if that ring of runes was a trap, just like that enormous treasure chest on the ground before? The result of all of that would be that he became the next victim to be chewed to pieces. The two thoughts battled fiercely in his mind, and Lhasa took a deep breath, then looked at Todd, who happened to be looking this way as well. Todd had originally been the backbone of the team. He had stayed in Deer Forest Town for many years, from a green novice just starting out, to the seasoned veteran he was now. He had been through many white portals, each one a random dungeon, and not a single one had been the same. Several times he had brushed past death, and he had also witnessed the deaths of many teammates, including even his closest kin. But this time, he felt despair again after a long absence. When he looked at the 3 arrows left in his quiver, the words of a former teammate surfaced in his mind. Sometimes the weapon in your hand is meant to grant yourself a dignified end. Of the 3 newcomers, he knew Jamie was already on the verge of giving up on himself. That little girl Devlin seemed to be holding up okay, but she might already be praying to her god. Only that young man, Lhasa, still had a strong desire to live in his eyes. Lhasa pointed at the bizarre-looking lizard with his hand, then gestured at his own neck. He mouthed, "Shoot an arrow. Let's try it." Todd understood what he meant. He took out an arrow, knocked his bow, and aimed. The monster over there was growing increasingly frenzied, its tail lashing about wildly. The range of its movements was getting larger and larger, making an accurate hit even more difficult. The other 3 also held their breath. At the instant the monster twisted its body, the bowstring twanged, and the arrow flew past its neck. Todd looked disappointed, but Lhasa was thrilled, because he clearly saw that the ring of runes had dimmed slightly, and a few wisps of black mist drifted out from it. That spot on the neck really was this monster's fatal weakness. The monster was clearly enraged. It turned around toward the direction the arrow had come from, the treasure chest on its head gaping wide, opening more than 90 degrees and letting out a shriek that was obviously not from any living creature. There were only a few final steps left to carry out that bold plan, and Lhasa made a few more hand gestures toward Maggie. But Maggie looked utterly confused and clearly did not understand what he meant. To Lhasa's surprise, Jamie on the other side nodded at him instead. The determination in the boy's eyes felt somewhat unfamiliar to Lhasa. The monster seemed to have decided that the direction where Todd was the culprit responsible for injuring it, and it quickly crawled that way. However, a voice made it change direction. "Hey, monster, look over here." Jamie stood at the opening where the passage led into the cavern. As he shouted loudly, he struck the rock wall with his dagger. That passage entrance was too small, so the monster could not get through. It futilely rammed its head against the rock wall and stuck out its long tongue, trying to coil it around Jamie, while carefully dodging the monster's attacks. While continuing to shout loudly, his throat had become a little hoarse, and his voice was starting to distort, but the volume did not lessen. Lhasa, with Maggie who had suddenly understood, tiptoed toward the monster's rear, gripping the short sword Jamie had dropped earlier. That spiked tail was still swaying back and forth, so Lhasa and the other had to dodge carefully. As they got closer and closer to the monster, Lhasa's heart sank to the bottom. He noticed a detail he hadn't paid attention to before. On the monster's back, on the surface of those rock scales, there was a layer of slick fluid. If they stood on it, they would probably have a hard time keeping their balance. Lhasa remembered that when they first tried to attack it, there clearly hadn't been this layer of slime. Could it be? He raised his head, and a drop of liquid condensed on a stalactite above the cave dripped right onto his face, bringing an icy cold touch. They could only change the plan and place all their hopes in Todd's combat skill. What he and Maggie had to do now was restrict the monster's movements as much as possible, making it easier for Todd's arrows to hit. Before they could even begin, Jamie's voice from the other side of the passage suddenly turned panicked. The people in the cavern immediately felt that something was wrong, but the treasure chest monster's body was blocking the entrance, so they couldn't tell exactly what was happening inside. And in the passage where Lhasa and the others could not see, Jamie looked toward the path they had come from, where several sneaky small figures had appeared, holding clubs and looking this way warily. It was those goblins that had escaped earlier. "The goblins are here. They've blocked my way." Jamie's trembling voice came through, and Lhassa's heart tightened. They couldn't wait any longer. At this moment, the monster, in order to attack Jamie in the passage, had already lowered its head to the ground. Perhaps in the next second it would raise its head again. This was the best opportunity. At the same time, in the passage, Jamie glanced at the goblins cautiously approaching from one side, then at the blue-purple tongue of the treasure chest monster lashing about on the other, and made up his mind. The dagger stabbed down fiercely, pinning the monster's tongue to the ground. In pain, the monster slammed its head hard against the rock wall, and its tongue began to thrash wildly. "Now, hurry," Jamie shouted. One of his feet was caught by that tongue, and he lost his balance and fell to the ground. Seeing this human, who appeared to have lost the ability to resist, the goblins over there grinned wide, foul-smelling saliva dripping from their teeth, and came over together with clubs in hand. In the cavern, at the instant they heard Jamie's voice, Lhasa and Maggie charged out together, using their bodies to pin the monster's treasure chest head against the rock wall at the passage entrance. The monster's body was twisting violently, and sharp pain shot through Lhasa's back as well. That was the monster's foreclaws tearing at his flesh. He tried to use the short sword to slash at the monster's neck, but he was always just a little short. Fortunately, behind them Todd's longbow had long been ready. He had even maintained the drawn bow stance for quite a while. The soreness in his arms was deliberately filtered out by his brain. The moment he had been waiting for had arrived. "Get out of the way," he roared. Combat skill, burst arrow ×2. The last 2 arrows in the quiver shot out almost at the same time. Using combat skills repeatedly had drained all of Todd's mental power. "Goddess Aphra, although I am usually often disrespectful, this once, just this once, please bless your people." In his blank mind, that final thought flashed through. Lhasa and Maggie dove to either side. 2 brilliant bursts of light exploded on the neck of the treasure chest-headed monster. In this instant, Lhasa only felt that this was more beautiful than any fireworks from his previous life, even though half his body was also struck by the electric light. Over by the passage, Jamie had already taken a hit from a goblin's wooden club on his back. Another goblin grinned viciously as it raised its club high, aiming at the human's head beneath its feet. Jamie sadly realized that, lying on the ground, he now had to look up at this vile monster. He spat a mouthful of bloody phlegm at the goblin. In that instant, he found himself dazedly wondering whether his father, who had died on an adventure, had faced the monster that killed him in the same way. Jamie did not receive the heavy blow he had imagined. Before his eyes, those arrogant goblins had turned into black ash. They drifted away on the wind, like the dandelion his father had once blown apart for him in his memories. Half of Lhasa's body was tingling and numb, and the wound on his back where he had been clawed was seeping blood, but all that pain seemed far less important the moment the monster died. He watched with his own eyes as the monster, struck by 2 explosive arrows, twisted its body in vain. Yet that ring of runes had already shattered, and the connection between the treasure chest and the lizard's body had lost its link. The enormous treasure chest crashed to the ground with a dull thud, then turned into black powder together with the powerless giant lizard's body. The disaster 2 years later suddenly didn't seem so terrifying now. There was not a single part of Lhasa's body that wasn't in pain, yet his heart was filled to every corner with the joy of victory. Maggie climbed up from the ground, and the leather armor she wore had also been completely torn apart by the monster's foreclaws, revealing the linen shirt underneath, yet she did not seem to be hurt much. The bodies of the dwarfling people seemed to have been tempered like the steel in their forges, and Maggie was one of the best among them. She quickly ran to Lhasa's side and helped up her companion. Lhasa, you're hurt so badly." The anxiety and concern in her voice moved Lhasa deeply. "I'm fine, Maggie, I'm still okay. I have some ointment here. Put some on first." "Damn it. Next time we absolutely have to find a teammate who knows healing skills." Maggie applied the pale green ointment to Lhasa's back. First it was cool, then tingling, and finally stinging. Lhasa's expression changed several times. At that moment, a golden light flashed in the center of the cave. A metallic treasure chest appeared there, much smaller than the trapped chest from before. At this time, Jamie and Todd also came over, supporting each other. In the battle just now, Todd had suffered the fewest injuries, but he was now in even worse shape than Nurkin had been when he had just collapsed from exhaustion before. His face was completely drained of color, his forehead covered in cold sweat, and even his pupils were trembling slightly. All 4 of them looked at the treasure chest together, seeing the wariness written all over the other 3's faces. Lhasa picked up a stone from the ground and threw it at the treasure chest, but because of his injuries, the throw was too weak and missed. Maggie understood his intention and directly hurled the iron hammer in her hand. The hammer spun several times in the air before striking the chest lid with a crisp clang of metal on metal. There shouldn't be any problem. Lhasa looked at Todd. "Uncle, do you want to open it?" Todd waved his hand, his voice especially deep. "Let's split it evenly. 1 item each in turn." Maggie rushed up directly and flipped open the treasure chest in one motion. The chest instantly turned into 6 golden beams of light that scattered onto the ground, and immediately after, a blue portal appeared inside the cave. "This is a real treasure chest, and a yellow chest at that," Todd said excitedly. "And that is the blue door back." Beside him, Jamie's eyes reddened and his voice choked with emotion. "That's great. It's finally over." Lothar looked at the 6 items that had appeared on the ground. The 3 on the left were a long sword with a silver gleam on its blade, a small badge, and a yellow cubic crystal, while the 3 on the right were a short bow, a belt, and finally, Lothar's eyes widened. He could not have been more familiar with the thing on the far right, but it absolutely should not have appeared in this world. "I'll take this one." Lothar's tone was firm and decisive. Todd and the others had not expected him to make his choice so quickly, and all looked toward the thing he was pointing at. It was a very strange-looking object that left people completely baffled. Its overall outline was like a trapezoid with its 2 acute angles stretched and distorted. Its surface was made of an unknown smooth matte material, with many circular and square protrusions on it, and on the left and right sides there was a structure resembling a mushroom cap. As a weapon, this thing's blunt shape and smooth surface could not really cause any damage. As armor, it was too small, and as an accessory, it was too large. Todd hesitated for a moment, but finally could not help speaking. "If I'm not mistaken, this should be one of the legendary Demon Realm collectibles. It has no practical use. Some nobles in the royal city might like this sort of thing, but there's a very high chance it'll just rot in your hands. Lothar, are you sure you want this? I personally suggest you pick something more practical. This is the one I want." To show his determination, Lothar directly took the item. Although Todd found it strange, it was hard for him to criticize his preference.